Proctophilia was the term. Now, proctophilia. I'm gonna give y'all a second to see if y'all can guess what that is. Religion and just so many different things. There are so many times where people are having a really hard time to just be in the pleasure and enjoy it, especially if being a woman in America and dealing with majority of the time sex being seen. How do you define the lifestyle?
Okay, yeah. So you can think of the lifestyle itself as an umbrella term. And within that umbrella, there are different categories. So BDSM, things of that nature. The swinging aspect, which is what we're here talking about today, is a form of E&M, ethical non-monogamy, where couples, majority of the time couples, are going to interact and play and engage sexually with other couples. Of course, with permission and established boundaries and rules and things that
especially those of us that have been rooting our sexuality in shame, to really evolve your consciousness and see how kink can be used.
You've entered the Queendomme. Unfiltered talk about life, love, sex, and the beauty of BDSM in the BIPOC community. This is where passion meets power and every conversation pushes past the surface. Your pleasure education starts now.
What's going on? What's cracking? How y'all doing? How your mama them? It is your girl Irene, the Passion Queen, and we are back with another episode of the Queendomme. Testing out a new intro. Let me know how y'all like it in the comments, please and thank you. So today is going to be a really good one. We do have the author, I guess you could basically say, of the framework TIC, which stands for Trauma Informed Consensual Kink. Um, they recently released an ebook. I got my hands on the ebook. It is very extensive information, but I think it is extremely important information. If you have been watching and rocking with the Queen for a while, you know something that we've touched on several times here and there is about how BDSM and kink can play a role in healing trauma, but also um, can be the cause of trauma if not performed safely, right? So that's what this particular framework really focuses on. And I'm super excited about this one because it does take the experience of being Black or a person of color into consideration in how we operate in BDSM and in the kink space itself. Um, it does not take you super fast through the book as far as like just throwing you into a bunch of information. This book is great for beginners. This book is great for if you are someone who is a sex worker, if you are a therapist. Um, a lot of different avenues that this book can be utilized in and just understanding the framework. So let me start off by giving you guys a definition of what a framework is, just in case you're like, oh, what? Let's start very basic, very simple, right? So a framework is designed as an essential supporting structure of a building, vehicle, or object, or a basic structure underlining a system, concept, or text. So in this case, it's underlining a system concept or text. Sorry. Um, so I did not ask if I can show the book to you guys. So I'll wait until they get here to show that to you. But I'll give you some of the basic definitions um, that we are working with, right? So let me go. I literally just had it on there. I've been scrolling through this whole book. Like I said, it is 300 plus pages. So when I say they put blood, sweat, and tears into this, they put blood, sweat, and tears into it. So trauma-informed consensual kink is a consent-based framework that emphasizes self-awareness within BDSM and kink practices, encouraging individuals to reflect on how identity, power, and pleasure intersect in their erotic experiences. Rather than offering a one-size-fits-all solution, TIC supports understanding consent through both rigid and nuanced explorations. Rooted in a decolonized approach, TIC challenges narrow pathology views. Sorry. TIC challenges narrow pathologizing. There we go. Views of BDSM by honoring its capacity for catharsis, connection, and care. This ebook introduces trauma informed consensual kink as a reflective and culturally rooted framework, a mindful lens shaped by Black practitioners to probe the crossroads of trauma, pleasure, safety, and consent. When I tell you, it is so important that this is out here because one of the other things that you all have constantly heard me say is that the way that we as Black people show up in the kink space is very different from our white counterparts or pretty much anybody else because of what our lived experiences are, specifically here in America, and just generational trauma that we carry and things of that nature. So a lot goes into this, um, into wanting to exercise your right to explore when it comes to kink and BDSM and fetishes and things of that nature. And you want to make sure that you're doing it properly, but not only are you doing it properly, but the person in which you decide to play with is also doing it properly because you never know, especially if you've never experienced certain things, you don't know what your reaction to certain things will be. So to be well informed about what the process is, what it looks like, how trauma can present itself when you're playing in a kink space and things of that nature. Um, is very important. Sorry. So, hey, honey, what's up, Kay? Um, so at this current moment, like I said, guys, we are waiting on Coach Feline to uh to show up. She already messaged me to let me know that they are running. We have Coach Feline in the building. There we go. All right, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Not as well as I would
Okay.
like to hear you, though. Let's see.
Okay. Okay. Let's see. We can make sure play
That's better.
around with
Can
the
you hear me
settings and
still?
stuff. Yep, I can still hear you.
Mm-mm.
You don't like the way that sounds?
No, it's very low, and it's not letting me go to. Allow. Say something. Hello, hello.
Hello, hello, hello.
There we go.
All right, perfect. So welcome in. We got the party started. I already been telling them about the book. But first off, let me tell you something. Because I haven't gotten all the way through the book because I'm taking my time. I didn't want to rush through this. I really wanted to be able to take in first off the the way you put it together. I can already tell it's gonna be an easy read and easy to follow and go through because it makes sense even for someone if it was a baby in the lifestyle, somebody who's just stepping foot into it, they could easily go through this. You know what I'm saying? And that's what I
Yeah.
like. Because I was, you read some stuff and it's like, babe, a lot of people not gonna understand what you're trying to say here. But before we get into all that, please tell the people who you are, how you got to where you are right now in this current space.
Yeah, that's a loaded question in itself. But what's up, Irene? What up? Crooked letter, hump
You
back.
know what I'm saying? Missy Dell said it's fine as baby.
You know what I'm talking about. So what's up, y'all? My name is Coach Feline. My official name, my government name, my daddy named me Candace Liger. I'm originally from Greenville, Mississippi, home of the Mississippi Delta. That's blues,
You,
catfish. We got the levee. You know what I'm
you
saying?
know what I'm saying? All that good stuff.
You know. Um, how did I get into it? I mean, it feels like such a loaded question. I will say that I didn't really have to get into it. It just got into me as part of
Mm,
this. When I say blood and bone, it definitely feels just like that. Um, I got into kink. Honestly, I got into it in sex work, honestly, probably at 20, so 20 years ago at this point. I was, doing my thing, underwhelmed, not getting a lot of excitement. And I ended up going to Vegas for some time. And that's where I really, really got my understanding of what these streets talking about, what the world's talking about. Just imagine, this this little chocolate thing from Mississippi in Vegas, looking at all these lights and navigating all the politics of the streets and all this money and drugs and everything else around. And I was fascinated. I was very much so fascinated. And I started off trying to do what all the other girls were doing, just make money, little transactional things. And I sucked at it. I sucked at it very badly. I remember like meeting people that I could possibly, engage with, you know what I'm saying? And they didn't trust me. They didn't trust me. I remember one guy even said, "No, you think a little bit too much for me." Like, all right. Yeah. So, long story short, I ended up coming across BDSM and kink culture there. And I had the opportunity to kind of frolic around in the dungeons and, meet all different types of folks, and really felt connected to that work. Because one, I didn't like the fluid exchange. I didn't like my body sharing. I didn't like all that. But I was like, okay, well, y'all want to listen to what I got to say? We can do that. That's easy. Let's make it happen. Let's negotiate. Right. Let's get specific. Let's get real specific in the process. You know what I'm saying? So I did that for a couple of years, and I ended up going back home after a while. Well, not even home. My mom had moved to Oklahoma. And I was trying to do the 9-to-5 thing for a minute, but it was hard. And it was hard because I have these bosses, these managers, and these supervisors who were pretty much core clientele if it was in Vegas. And now I'm trying to listen to you and follow your directions. And I'm looking at them like, I don't know if I want to follow your directions. So after getting fired from many jobs in my lifetime, I got into entrepreneurship as a fitness coach. And I realized that there was a lot of the things that showed up in kink culture, even in fitness, even in body work in general. But like the streets it never left me. I was always kind of adjacent to it for a while. But from that time, I started doing like erotic events. I was doing a lot of poetry during that time. I was doing a lot of social justice organizing, supporting Black women and femmes specifically for fighting against domestic violence, incarceration, sexual assault. And I was really fascinated how consent functions inside of like social justice space and organizing and working to just let a motherfucker know that no means no versus the other side, the community, where the conversations felt to be more robust, more specific, more informed, and also just the same amount of harm, violence, and everything else in that space. So yeah, that's a little bit of the background. I think if I can add to that, during that time I became a mother, and so I got into the work for survival. I didn't really get into it for pleasure. It was fun. I mean, I had my fun, but for the most part, I was just about my business. Right. And so survival was always like the core tenet. Like, I can do this when I get fired. I can do this if I don't have clients in other ways. I can do this. I can always resort to this if nothing else. Yeah. So I think that's enough for right now. That's a short version into like a little bit of my background.
But definitely appreciate you sharing that information, because I think it sets a great groundwork because you do actually give a little bit of background and information about yourself also in the book. So once again, y'all, if the link is in the description before anybody, it's already there. Click it, buy it. Thank you. Okay. But I think it's very important, because one of the things, as I was saying earlier when I was talking about the book, that I've mentioned several times here on the show, is how, on the one hand, kink can be extremely healing. It can be extremely freeing. You can heal from trauma with kink. But if not handled properly, it can actually be trauma inducing. And the fact that we as Black people show up very differently in kink, because I think that one of the first things that threw me when I first started learning about kink, I was down in Orlando, Florida. I was 6 or 7 years into being a pure romance consultant, trying to
Mhm.
expand and just wanted to learn more information because coming from Greenville, Mississippi, you will understand, baby, they tell you keep a nigga between your legs till you get married. Don't catch no
Mhm.
diseases out here. It's not much past that. You know what
Yeah.
I'm saying? So coming into this world and learning about sexual health and wellness, but then wanting to understand more because at the end of the day, it still look very different from us because that was always my thing talking to some of the white girls and stuff like that. I was like, y'all see this world very differently than I
Right.
do as a black girl from Mississippi, right? Very differently. Um, and so I got into it, and of course, going to the dungeons, it was mostly white people. Didn't, baby. If I saw one, I was surprised. Okay, if I saw one of us, I was like, hey, you see me, I see you. Okay, we see each other. Cool.
Mhm.
Um, and I felt like I couldn't indulge the way I wanted to.
Yeah.
For that reason, that was part of the reason. Another part of the reason was the person I was with, who I did not trust to begin with. So that was, another layer of the situation. But um, I said it constantly as this page has grown and I've grown in this in about how we just look at things differently. And then I was at Sex Down South last year and I was taking a session in the dungeon, and honestly, Nay mentioned tick. I said, "Wait, what is that? I
What's up?
haven't heard. Right,
What's
I hadn't heard.
what's up?
Yeah." So honestly, Nay, shout out to her for mentioning that because she was teaching the class at the time, or they were teaching the class at
Mhm.
the time, and they mentioned it, and I immediately went to Instagram. I was like, "Oh, I gotta find this. Don't worry about it," because I need to know because it sounded exactly like something I had recently been having a conversation with some friends about. It sound that whole portion around how trauma plays a part in this space. And because I think I had just done a show and we were talking about how if you are a person who's experienced domestic violence and what a part of that domestic violence was choking, but now you've been in kink and you find yourself being pleasured from choking, it's because
Mhm.
you've been able to like take back the power that you felt you lost in the domestic violence situation of it, right?
Mhm.
Um, and I was like, okay, I got to see what's going on. So I've definitely been following for a while, and and I've been seeing some of the stuff that you posted. I'm like, okay, all right, and I don't know. So I'm so happy that we got to the point where I was like, let me just ask because I feel like a conversation needs to be had, right?
I'm here for it. I'm glad you did.
I am so. Okay, so like I said, the ebook currently is over 300 pages, so it's a lot of information. What are some key values that you think are a part of TIC that one set it apart from all the other frameworks? Because we know there are a few other frameworks. We've talked about them here on the show. I posted them about them on my page, all that good stuff. But one that sets it apart and also are, I guess, the ultimately the foundation of what TIC is.
Yeah, yeah, that's a really good question. Um, so there's many components, right? I think the first thing is that every other framework that has governed BDSM or kink has literally came with nothing, and we've said, okay, we accept it. As we say the acronym SSC, rack, prick, 4Cs, maybe we go into, fries or, that kind of shit. But we have been governed by consent principles that have offered no context. We don't know who these people were. We don't know if we were thought about or included in the use of the language, or were we even at the table? And the answer is no. But
Yeah, I understand.
Yeah, and then they're old, right? So SSC comes out in the 1980s. Some of the latest frameworks comes out late 90s. I think like 4Cs came out early 2000s. And I think it's fascinating because in BDSM and kink, we have this culture where specificity is powerful. The more you know about yourself, the more you can ask for, the more you feel comfortable setting boundaries, etc., the better the interaction could possibly be. And you don't have to be, floating into the abyss trying to figure out what feels good and don't. So that's the first thing, is that TIC is very much so political. And it's political not just because the acronyms that we've been governed by didn't offer anything. It's political because also many trauma-informed frameworks, the whole concept of trauma-informed at large, that is derived from pretty much the medical complex, trauma-informed care, is very much so white-centric. And the ideas and their approaches are white-centric. And if they're not white-centric, then they're co-opted from Black and brown communities and then presented as their own. And in order to understand what are the practices that actually cultivate liberation and resistance for Black folks, they have to go into Black communities. They have to research Black and brown folks. And then they pull it into the framework. So shit that seems very, very like rudimentary, like, we should be transparent, right? Is now like this really grand, fascinating tenet, like transparency. Wow. So the other part that is part of that point is that TIC is political because it's Black centered. Not only am I Black, not only am I Southern, not only am I femme, not only do I identify as politically queer, every person who's helped inform this has been Black or brown. And that feels like a reclamation in itself. And so I know there's this thing, right? When people hear TIC and they hear trauma-informed consensual kink, it can be very off-putting because they like, I don't want to talk about trauma while I'm trying to get my willies off. You know what I'm talking about? I don't want to be thinking about that shit. And the reality is that's not actually what it's really about. What it's really about is that many folks who are in Black and brown communities who may have trauma would never get diagnosed for having trauma because the medical complex suggests that you're strong, you're okay, and unless you crashing out, we're not gonna diagnose you with shit. Or many people would never even consider a therapist. Many people would never consider what they've experienced to be trauma in the first place. So one thing that TIC also I intended to do was expand our understandings of trauma. So it's not just these are things that are trauma. It is these are things that we've been dealing with for a long time in this community that cause a great deal of discomfort, hurt, lack of inclusion, maybe things that we've already experienced, whether it was in our lifetime or historically, that could impact our way towards pleasure. So it's not just you have to be diagnosed with trauma or that you should diagnose yourself with trauma. It is also, what have you been naming as trauma that may not be? It's also like, what are some of the places that you may not feel as comfortable that you have actually learned how to navigate through? It's also, who are you when the mask comes down, when you're standing at the fucking crossroads? Who are you and what is required of you to navigate 2025? And in 2025, the language around trauma is prevalent. So those are the points about TIC as far as it being a political framework created by Black folks. But as far as like what folks can take away from it, it's really just about self-reflection. It's really about, here are some very present things. We know that there's pushback that consent is binary. So yes, no, consent doesn't fit. But don't it kind of fit? Don't we need yes, no's and in the in-between to understand like our spectrum of understanding? So I rebuke the idea that consent should not be binary. No, consent is binary, because life and death is binary, because day and night is binary, because what we, because what we are able to see and experience operates in binaries and expansion. But it also brings in the nuance. So it's not an either or, it's a both and. And so how do we, move through self-awareness while reflecting inside of this community where shit is happening? That this is just a microcosm of what's already present out in the world. There's racism out there. There's capitalism out there. There's predatory people out there. There's motherfuckers who gonna try to penetrate you while you got your eyes closed and rolled back, blindfolded, and don't know what they have to do out there. All the shit that's in the world is absolutely in BDSM and kink, and so it's also pushing back on this idea that this place is safe, or that BDSM is a safe container. And I've been in several workshops where it's like, it's about the healing. We can move through. Part of it is this embodied experience. No, you are in the streets, this culture was designed by the streets. Okay. Like, we got knives and whips and floggers, got a lot of shit. And so I don't like people coming into this place thinking, oh, I'm safe here because they said this is a safe, sane, consensual spot. It's like, let's get real, because you need to know something before you get in there. What do you need to reflect on before you move into this world? Because you're going to fuck around and find out. And I hope that the finding out is worth it.
Right. So I think you hit on so many good points, especially the fact that just because it's a BDSM space does not inherently mean that it's automatically safe. Um, One of the things that I've talked about before is that this new surgence of BDSM influencers, gurus, doms, whatever the case may be, that have come out of COVID. Because I feel like a lot of people were stuck in the house and they saw individuals that were talking about the lifestyle because they couldn't go outside, they couldn't practice outside, things like that. So what they did was they came to social media, they came to the internet, and they started having these open dialogue conversations that typically you had to go to a lunch and have, you had to go to the dungeon and have. They weren't as prevalent online. And so you get all these people that's like, oh, they're getting a lot of attention. I'm gonna just call myself this and I'm gonna say these things because I see the reaction that is happening. And it's like it took on this life of its own where you have all these people now pretending for likes, clicks, views, whatever the case may be. And it can be extremely harmful, especially if you try and take this persona that you could say that you tried to build online and bring it into real life and claim that you're gonna practice, some form of BDSM kink or whatever, or anything like that. Like you said, with floggers, with impact play, knife play, fire play, all these other things you see happening, and now you say, "Oh, I can do that," but you have had absolutely no training because training is involved in these things. And no matter what people try to think, I should just be able to do it. No, 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 no. A lot of these things can be extremely dangerous and life altering, if not life taking, if not done properly.
That's right.
And so I think it's important that we acknowledge that. And not only can it be unsafe in terms of somebody just being inexperienced, but like you said, just like it's racism out there, there's racism inside these spaces, especially when you're going to a space that is white, mostly white people. You don't know the mindset of all these people. They may be very accepting of the things that are going on inside this building. It doesn't mean they're gonna be accepting of you doing these things inside of this building. Which is why I've been so happy to be able to create a circle of people who look like me to have these conversations with.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? It makes a world of difference about it because I keep telling people, hey, I've gone like my first introduction, baby. It was just me and my ex at the time, the dude I was talking to at the time. We was the only black folk up in there.
Yep.
And when I say I was sitting there like, I had some of my white friends with me, and that's cool. But we always on high alert because we gotta see the things that don't nobody else pay attention to.
Right.
Um, so let's say, how would you like to see this utilized when it comes to therapy, though? Because I did see that you mentioned that, and I'm an advocate for finding a kink affirming therapist. If you're going to go down that route, especially if you are already in the kink space or looking to go into the kink space, how would you love to see this framework being utilized in therapy?
Yeah, yeah. I think the first thing is what happens, and so I'm in several different types of trauma informed space, not just trauma informed kink. But what often happens, and I can't speak for all people, but I do know for Black folks, is sometimes they intertwine their trauma with their pleasure. And so they say, well, kind of like you mentioned, like, okay, maybe I've been into a domestic violence situation that was choking, and then I get into kink and I find myself liking choking. There's a pathway where that can be about just reclamation. That's you getting your power back, reclaiming the power back, and that's one part of tick. And then the other part of tick is just getting to the fucking pleasure, and not necessarily needing to assign yourself a diagnosis in order to have pleasurable experience. So the other part of that is, how do we experience more pleasure without also having to unpack our trauma at the same time? So trauma can exist, sure, but that's not a prerequisite for us to get into or experience more pleasure. And so I think it is in the mental health spaces, even in therapy, I think that part is important. I've had the opportunity to share some panels with other therapists, and the way that they look at like trauma informed approaches to kink is very clinical. So in the sense of, I remember I was on one, and I think I made a video about it, but the question was, what do you do if someone's having a trauma response? And everybody on the panel was like, you stop immediately, check in on them, make sure everything's okay. And I'm sitting there like, no, absolutely not. That's not necessarily the answer. And the reason that's not the answer is because you don't know if what they're experiencing is a trauma response. We're not out here licensed clinicians, you know what I'm saying, engaging with each other for pleasure. So what happens when we start to over-diagnose and over-pathologize like things that people experience? Okay, so your eyes roll back in your head. Man, let me tell you something. I've had clients scream to God, eyes roll back in their head, shake, shiver, sweat, spit, bleed, fart, everything in between. That is not my job to determine with how they express themselves is a trauma response. The only thing that I know to do is if they say stop, they say the safe word, they ask to shift, I can honor that. But just because, so it was like, all right, so y'all are clinicians. So you're looking at this like, oh, you have been through school and you've dedicated these nice little check boxes for what is trauma. But we out here in these streets, we don't, everybody doesn't have that type of insight. So what does that require from us? That requires for us to be really clear and develop more awareness around how we respond, what we want to experience more of in the event that somebody gets off balance or maybe has a response that is really uncomfortable. How do you need to be taken care of in that moment? So as far as how therapists can use it, honestly, it starts by fucking reading it. Like go through it, let it challenge all of the sort of institutional knowledge that you've gained, right? So that you can better serve your clients where they're at. And part of how you better serve your clients is letting them have space to explore pleasure without also having to constantly unpack trauma. So if I do a session and I've had like small instances or different variations of this where maybe someone says, I really want to move through this feeling. All right, we can kind of create that together. But if I'm actually trying to create the type of container that where a person may have a therapist and they're like, okay, I think if I get this person to sort of spank some shit out of me, I can, reach the next level because talk therapy ain't enough, then I have collaborated with the therapist. So I've done collaborative work, and that is an opportunity where, people who have therapists hopefully can be kink affirming or sex affirming therapists can help them set up containers to meet people who can move through certain things. But out here in these streets and healing streets and laying hands and everything else, we do what the spirit moves us to. We do what the spirit requests. We do what is within our ability to communicate with each other. And so, no, we don't also have to try to figure out what's going to be trauma or what is or what ain't trauma at the same time. We can just acknowledge that, hey, most of us have experienced trauma at some point. There's going to be some places where I need to be curious. I need to be curious how you respond if you start slipping into subspace. I need to be curious how you respond if it actually gets so intense, but you feel locked up and don't feel like you can verbalize. I need to be curious how we can stop if you are gagged and can't say the safe word. We need to have some nonverbal ways of communicating. We create curiosity instead of like these static, rigid definitions of like how to move. So that's what therapists can do, is just be curious.
Okay, all right. I like that.
That's a lot of words. I know a lot of words.
So how about when we're taking the framework of tech into negotiation spaces? Because one of the biggest things I feel like some people have not completely grasped is negotiations in general. Like, what does it look like? What, not trying to feel like, oh, I shouldn't ask for this, I shouldn't ask for that type of thing. Just being comfortable in that space, and also ultimately knowing what they want, what they're looking for, all that kind of stuff going into negotiations. But how can tech be essential for that step in the process of building a dom sub dynamic?
Yeah. Well, I definitely tried to be very intentional with adding a lot of reflection questions, both kink related and not. I think what some of the barriers to negotiation are often thinking that it is just about the scene. It's just about what we're creating, when actually part of negotiation is knowing who you are and what you want, how you communicate, how you express pleasure, how you express discomfort, right? Those are just as critical. So there is a section that includes like negotiation questions. Here's some things that you can ask, including stuff like, are there any parts of your body that are off limits? All right. Are there any parts that, or how do you respond when you get uncomfortable? Some of these questions, especially as far as dynamics are concerned, are not so much rooted into how do you ask the other person. It is more so rooted into what questions would you want to be asked? And if those questions aren't asked, then you present that information anyway. I've been in like dungeons where, there's the St. Andrew's cross and shit like that. And I've seen like just regular pickup play, folks immediately grab somebody's arms and put them on the cross, right? The question was never asked about shoulder mobility, hypertension. It was never asked about restriction at the wrist or binding at the wrist. And so like those things are a two-way street, because I can ask 100 questions and still miss the question that you actually needed the most. Right. And so that means that if I don't ask it, then there's still that sharing. There's a dual responsibility to create the clarity. But you know, it is challenging because we're in a age right now where there isn't a lot of curiosity. It immediately goes to like punishment and assigning, oh, this motherfucker's like this person's like this person's like this. Okay. And what I found, even in mediation and supporting folks who have had conflict and been in conflict myself, is that when you uncover it all, something wasn't shared.
Right.
Something wasn't shared, something wasn't communicated, or something wasn't heard, or something wasn't received, or something wasn't shared or understood before the play began to happen. So I think that's important, especially inside of like DS dynamics or any power-based dynamics, because there's this assumption, if you're a D type, then you should know what questions to ask. If you a D type, you should know what to do and what not to do. And that's not the case, which is why, you know, when you hit the lower alphabet realm, if a person says something like, you know, I don't know, you can kind of, you know, we can just kind of figure it out and do it. Nope.
Absolutely not.
Absolutely not. You're a liability. You're a liability. Maybe if I was, if, you know, maybe if my identity was newer, right? And it was just more about exploring, but the more information we have, the more responsibility we have. And so it's like, we still have to assess each other, even inside a negotiation. If you're an S type and you're asking your D questions, I'm like, oh, no, you ain't got to worry about all that. You ain't got to ask all that. You already know I got you. You got to pay attention to that. You got to pay attention to that.
Baby, I ain't trusting that. Nah,
yeah,
I'm
right.
let you.
You got to check in with yourself. Is this what you want?
Yeah. I think that's you hit on some amazing points because I'm big on the education of it all, right? Child, I don't even know what it is. What are those 2-inch binders full of just information? That's how I started my journey in learning before I really even practiced and experienced anything outside of a couple of like demonstrations at a munch that I went to one time. Like before I literally had my foot into letting somebody like let's full on practice play some stuff, baby, I was in here reading beyond reading. Okay. And then I got introduced to the BDSM test online. Took that, which I encourage people to take it, but I also, whenever I tell somebody to take it, I'd be like, hey, this is just like a peek behind the veil. This is not an all encompassing. This does not define you definitively. This is literally just to kind of give you a better idea of some things that you may be a little bit more interested in or want to learn more information about, whatever the case may be. But I feel like education is the part that a lot of people try to skip over and just, I'm gonna just figure it out as I go along. Nah, figuring out as you go along, you mess around and now you're in the hospital and you don't know what the hell happened.
Yeah.
I'm not doing that. But you mentioned being in the dungeon spaces. And you did mention in the book that this, you know, dungeons and educators are definitely some perfect people who could utilize this. And I know for dungeon masters, you know, they're there to keep their eye out and make sure things are good, make sure nobody goes overboard, make sure everybody is being respected and stuff like that. Um, how do you see something like tick being implemented in these spaces? Because I've only been in like 1 or 2 dungeons, so I'm still learning what that space looks like. A lot of my practices have been a very one-on-one situation with someone, so a lot more tailored, a lot more centered, not a whole lot of things, you know, going on. So how do you see tick being utilized in a space like a dungeon?
Yeah. Well, you know, first I want to go back to so you said something, you made a good point about if you're coming into it, how, you know, that there should be a baseline for education. And I agree with that wholeheartedly. You know, there are more people, I believe, who would benefit from that than not. And I also know some folks, yeah, that really just get out here. I am both and. And so there's a part that's like, all right, yeah, make sure you get your education. Then I also meet a lot of people who stay there. They stay in the education place and it locks them there because they're like, oh my God, this is too much information. This is too much that they never actually get into it. Or they get so much education that they learn how to weaponize their knowledge. And so they can say the right words, they can move, they can, they can put the pieces in all the right places, they can say the right things, but once they get in practice, they don't know what to do. So I really encourage folks to do both, only because coming from Mississippi, I also recognize that there are some geographical differences. Yeah. So in Mississippi, where are you gonna go to find to play when the 1990s to early 2000s? I didn't know of any. I later met some folks, but if you went to New York, DC, Cali is everywhere. And what I've also learned is that just because they actually have a lot and big communities in education, they are only speaking to the people in that area. They're not speaking to the folks in the South. They're not speaking to the folks in the back on the back roads. They're using a lot of language. I try to shape shift into both languages at times, but it's a lot of language, and you miss shit. I know it's people already that miss shit that I said already, but I think that's real, and I'm glad that I came into it raw. But I also know that based on my psychological profile, that I could, that I could do that. So that's one of the first things I want to mention. I think the second thing when it comes to dungeons, I think there's a lot of dungeon spaces that do a really good job with creating education and offering like baseline sort of care, whether that's having an aftercare room, a space for people to sort of not be as stimulated, whether that's dungeon monitors or making sure there's water or, having some privacy sort of security things available. I've been to more dungeons that actually get it right than wrong.
Okay.
However, there is something really unique about the dungeon space, especially if it's not curated. If it is where you just go and hope to meet somebody that you can pick up with and play right quick, that can be a lot harder if there aren't pathways to do so. So one of the things, I don't think I put this in the book, but for like dungeon spaces, one thing that I found to be really beneficial is just having a whiteboard, and where people can literally just write their name, maybe like a descriptive about what they wear. It can be like their kink name, or it doesn't have to be their government name, descriptive about what they wear, and maybe it's split top bottom switch. And so people can look and say, all right, here go Migos down here. Migos is looking for impact play. They're a bottom, red hat. I can at least look around and try to find Migos versus trying to start new conversations with random people and be like, can I spank you though? It's just it get a little weird. So I think that. And I honestly believe that every dungeon, organization, institution that is running any sort of actual play parties where people are being physical with each other need to also be in relationship with some sort of mental health professional. And that's just having one on the squad. They don't even have to be in the spot. But when things do happen, that there is a source to refer people to, because shit happens. And oftentimes in community care, we're trying to take care of each other. We're trying to handle conflict. We're trying to hold people accountable and all of that stuff. And sometimes it's great, sometimes it's not. Right. But also having a team that we can refer people to when we know it's out of our scope. If someone hears a whip for the first time in the dungeon and the sound of that crack, that sound of cracking the fucking sound barrier gets underneath their skin. Now they're having a response. Do we have anybody available that can tend to this? Or do we have anyone available that we can refer them to help them unpack that, later on? I think that's one of the most powerful things that those spaces can have. It's just a team.
Yeah. Because listen, that noise, the first time you hear it, it's the what the fuck? It is very much a startling noise. So we're almost at time, but I do want to kind of go back a little bit to one of the first things that you mentioned, which is consent is binary. Because I definitely am one of the people who's like, nah, the consent is not a maybe. The consent is not a yes, we'll see. It's we the enthusiastic yeses and nos. You know what I'm saying? So when it comes to consent, can you talk about the framework? Because I see a lot of different points that you make throughout the book when it comes to consent. Specifically, I guess you can call it chapter 8, inside the expanse gray areas of consent. Can you kind of give us a little taste on that? Because I want the people to go get the book first off. Y'all need to go get the book and read. Please and thank you.
Yeah.
Just give us a little taste.
Yeah. So consent is binary. Consent is nuance. Consent is powerful. Consent is vulnerable. Consent is clear. Consent is not. What I do appreciate about TIC is that it's everything. Everything is important, not just one way of being or one way of doing. So when I say consent is binary, that means that we do not, in this space, ignore the very real realities of our own yeses and our own nos. Maybe they shift, maybe they change, but those are real. Those are real. We know if somebody comes up to us, drooling up at the mouth, looking like they want to eat us alive, whether or not that's our shit. Right. Maybe we don't want to feel like prey. Maybe we got to feel it out. But the yeses and nos are really important to just creating the foundation. When you get into, I think, chapter 8 inside the expanse, however, now we're looking at places where it gets complicated inside of kink, which is, I have a few pages that are split into black and white. And like one part will say, your surrender makes me feel powerful. And then the other part is when I'm on my knees, I feel the most powerful. Right? That's some nuanced shit. That's some nuanced shit. So when we think about our some of the binaries that exist in the world, especially inside of a lot of trauma-informed work, we're looking at our attachment styles. Are we more emotional or logical? Are we looking at maybe our gender expression? Do we identify as masc or femme or non-binary? We're looking at the ways that we process. Do we process mostly verbally, or do we like to be alone and take some time? That's kind of some binary shit that's already inside of like trauma-informed work. When you get into the expanse, however, now we're looking at, okay, what if, for instance, I am someone who is possibly neurodivergent. I may have a disability. I may be someone who sits inside the gender spectrum or beyond the gender spectrum. There may be some types of play that aren't hard yeses or hard nos, but it really depends. Maybe we're even looking at our own archetype. Yeah, we identify as a dom, but I also don't like hurting people. Yeah, I identify as a sub, but I don't want no collar around my neck, right? And so when we get into the expanse, it gets really, really tricky. So there's not actually a lot of consent recommendations in the binary and the expanse. A lot of what's inside of those spaces are, who are you?
Okay.
Who are you? What do you want? Why are you here? How do you define yourself? How does that definition of how you define yourself show up in the way that you play, in the way that you sing, in the way that you've experienced desire or pleasure. And so a lot of that becomes self-reflective. I think later in the book, when it gets into like the practice section and we're looking at space. So tick is sort of this political, self-aware, this is the culture, this is the moment that we're in framework. But inside of tick is space, which is a little bit more of a practice application. And space stands for safety, pleasure, awareness, communication, and empathy. So once we get inside of space, we can think really specific about what does it mean for safety? First of all, I don't believe that any person or any place is safe. I don't care. The church ain't always safe. Family ain't always safe. Going outside, staying inside ain't always safe. Food ain't always safe. So inside of safety, I can look and see, okay, what are the things that I feel most important to make me feel safe? Is it that there's not a lot of fluid exchange? Is it that the check-ins come in a specific way? Is it disclosure of STIs? Is it, using or having specific instruments used on me or not? Like safety is expansive. And so once it gets into space, each of those letters, safety, pleasure, awareness, communication, acronym, offer a way to really think about how does this look in practice outside of, my own awareness. What do I need for my pleasure? Does my pleasure change when I'm moving up against my cycle? When the moon looks a certain way? Does my need for pleasure change depending upon if I'm hungry or angry or lonely or tired, right? Like it's a lot of things that can be considered. I really wanted this shit to do the very opposite of the letters. So we have SSCs and racks, and it's just like these letters. And so I was like, you know what? I thought it was going to be 25 pages, and then it went up to 50, then it went up to 100. I said, you know what? 350 plus. Fuck it. Instead of just these letters, I'm going to give you so much
right,
that you have to reference this over and over and over again to really think about how does consent look for you in your most powerful place? And how do you handle it when it don't work out the way that you thought it was going to work out?
Okay, because that also is a thing. I'm already set up here trying to figure out, do I want to just leave it as the ebook or am I printing this out? Because I can see myself going through and constantly making notes and, just pinpointing things for my own journey and stuff like that. That's why I was like, I got it. And I was like, I can't rush through this. I know I can't rush through this just trying to make the deadline of today's show.
I love that. I'm so glad you said that because I released it and the feedback has been so small. And I had to tell myself, you gave them 350 pages. You ain't finna get no feed. I don't care if I get feedback in the next year. You know what I mean?
No. This is not like we sit down to read a dark romance over the weekend.
Right.
This is not that. This is very much some intentional information that, you're going to do a lot of reflection on. Because even with the small amount I've already delved into, I didn't have that couple questions like, I ain't never thought about that, type thing. So I can only imagine, especially looking at some of the other topics, like I got a homegirl, Samantha Odeyale. I call her Sam Bam. It's my boo. She is big on how BDSM and spirituality intersects, and you have a section on here about that. I probably will have to do a show with both of y'all on here.
I think that would be beautiful because some non-consensual shit happens in that too. It's like what kind of route you running, what kind of rituals we doing? Does the person you working with, are they aware of what this means, what it doesn't mean? Is it binding? Is it not binding? Is it, like all of that matters. And so there's a consent that happens inside of that process because spiritually you can consent to some shit you can't get rid of.
Hello. And we ain't even talking about the stuff you gotta go to the doctor for. Hello. Yeah. All right there. That's why I be like, hey, don't be touching me. I don't know you. Listen. But so it's a lot of information, but I think it is so important, especially for our community And I feel like we're going through this huge shift culturally for Black people
Yeah.
where you see us, a lot of our generation is specifically getting away from a lot of things of our parents and our grandparents. And just that old way of thinking, super, being super religious, but it's based on Christianity and not really looking at where our people really come from and how we got to where we are now, just like the whole expansion of it all, because I'm loving seeing the change that's happening from our generation going into the younger generation.
Yeah.
Um, and I'm happy that you made sure to point out that there is a political piece to this, because a lot of people forget that our pleasure is extremely political. It just is, especially if you are a femme, if were born a cis woman, specifically. It is, yeah. I need y'all to pay attention to what's going on there. Okay. I know
Yeah.
I don't get into politics a whole lot. I try to have a space that's safe where we can talk about a lot of things, but the truth of the matter is our pleasure is extremely political.
Yeah.
So I love the fact that
Fucking
that's something
trauma
that you
is
talk about.
political. Our pleasure is political and our trauma is political. That is wild. That is
Everything
wild. Yeah.
is, yeah. Child, that's a whole
Yeah.
that's a whole other world.
Yeah.
But we're definitely gonna have you back on there. Like I said, I encourage everybody to go and get the book. I included the links to both of your Instagram pages as well as straight to the book to order it down below in the description box. Oh yeah, baby. I didn't even want them to have to wait to find you. They
Well,
they
I
they
can't. I know that's right. I can say that September is National Consent Month. It's right around the corner. I will be offering all kind of free opportunities to have access to the book. It's on sliding scale right now because I put out some free copies and they went within hours. I was like, okay. Yeah, all right.
listen.
So September rolls around. If you don't have resources, it's okay. This is for the people. I'm gonna make sure that you have access to it. But there's sliding scales available until I go back in. Once I recover from sending my kid off to college, from $5 all the way to $40. So there's options. But if you want to wait until September, I got you. Hit me up, inbox me, DM, say, hey, make sure you keep my copy. I want that. And I'm gonna make sure you have it. It's easy. It's easy work, light work.
Come on, light work.
Light work.
Do you have anything else for the people that you would love for them to know before we get on up out of here?
Um, yeah. Make sure y'all tell people that tick ain't about trauma. It ain't just about trauma. Make sure y'all tell people that the language trauma informed is the political part, but there is value inside of it, whether or not you trying to diagnose yourself or not. Go ahead and just dispel that myth. And outside of that, your pleasure is priority. You don't necessarily have to unpack a lot to experience a moment of fucking yes. So get to it and get to it safely and take care of yourself along the way.
That's what I'm talking about. And y'all know me, I'm your girl, Irene, the Passion Queen. If I'm on the platform, you can find me as such. Make sure y'all are downloading the song, downloading or purchasing the books. Damn it, I need to upload the new merch. New merch coming. Okay, we got new merch coming.
New merch.
But yeah, so we definitely will have to revisit this. Like I said, I'm definitely gonna make sure we do a show with both you and Sam on there because I think that's going to be really dope. But until next time, we'll see y'all. Not next Tuesday, but the Tuesday after that, we're gonna be talking about aftercare with Surplus. So I think that's gonna be a dope ass conversation. Until then, bye.